Remember this moment when a Nazi was invited to Canada's parliament when Zelensky was in town and they did a big glad-handing session and a standing ovation? Watch this.
Zelensky's speech received at least a dozen standing ovations. There was also one for this man, a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians during the Second World War.
Of course, there was a firestorm, and everyone wanted to know, wait a second, who invited a Nazi? And why did we give them a standing ovation? Who invited this guy? Well, remember when Trudeau came out and said this, that it was the Speaker of the House that invited them, and all of the applause that you were seeing was simply Russian disinformation.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened. The speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and by extension to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
But wait a second, was Trudeau correct there? Was he accurate in that statement? Was that true? Well, it turns out that was a lie.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has been claiming for months that he had no involvement in or knowledge of the invitation of a former Nazi soldier to the visit of the Ukrainian president. Now we know that he personally invited that same individual. He actually said the opposite, and he said that the former speaker had to resign over doing the exact same thing. So will he hold himself to the very same standard and admit that he's not fit for office?
We want to bring in David Creighton, who's a journalist from Canada, writes at the Post Millennial and who has a YouTube channel as well, Creighton's Right. David, it's shocking to see that gambling is going on in this establishment. So, I mean, it appears to me that Trudeau threw his speaker under the bus.
Yeah, he definitely threw the speaker under the bus. We reported at the time that Trudeau was well aware of who this individual was, this Yaroslav Hunka, that Trudeau had actually met with Yaroslav Hunka. We had the evidence on Facebook. Hunka's daughter-in-law posted that her father-in-law had met with the speaker, the House leader, and the Prime Minister before speaking, or before Zelensky spoke, and he had two standing ovations in the House of Commons, the clip you just saw. So we knew, Trudeau knew, but now we have concrete proof that Trudeau actually invited Yaroslav Hunka to a reception in honor of the Ukrainian President Zelensky in Toronto. He was on the guest list. So if Trudeau invited him to the reception, obviously Trudeau knew he was going to be in Parliament, sitting in the House of Commons, in the gallery. And to blame the speaker, obviously the speaker should be blamed. He was proud to have him there, and the speaker was too stupid to know that if you were fighting Russians in 1943, you were probably on the German side. But nonetheless, Trudeau has never taken responsibility for this action. He should have resigned, like he insisted the speaker did. Now, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has said that in the House this week. Clearly, Trudeau knew. Is he going to resign like the speaker, like he told the speaker to do? Trudeau literally got up and left the House of Commons after responding in his usual way of distraction to say that somehow this was about the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and Poilievre was to blame for somehow he was behind all this. And Trudeau literally got up from his seat and left the House of Commons. He refused to answer another question on that subject. He handed the bag to his House leader, the government House leader, Steve McKinnon, who then answered the rest of the questions that day in question period about this incident. Shocking. Absolutely. But when it comes to Justin Trudeau, I guess I'm through being shocked by his actions.
And so, Pierre Poilievre said, well, will the Prime Minister resign? I mean, he, after all, did call for the resignation of the House Speaker to resign, and he did. So, should he be held to the same standard?
well, clearly he should be held to the same standard, but Justin Trudeau holds himself to no standard but his own. And he's been in legal entanglements in the past, the SNC-Lavalin affair, his Christmas trips that are never really above board. Either he's visiting Trudeau Foundation friends or he's accepting massive gifts. There's always something wrong with Trudeau's actions. But to lie about who invited this guy to the House of Commons and to deny, and when the evidence is presented to your face, even CBC has effectively run a story saying Trudeau lied to us. Trudeau knew who this guy was. He invited him. Stop just blaming the speaker. But
Do you think
he will not be held accountable.
Do you think he can get away with saying, well, I didn't really know his past. I didn't know much about him at all. And kind of defer blame in that way, that he didn't really know anything about the guy?
I doubt it. I don't think so. And it's interesting because there was a commission struck up by Brian Mulroney in the 1980s called the Shane Commission, and to investigate how many Nazi war criminals came to Canada, or how many people with a Nazi past came into Canada. Now, it turns out Canada accepted thousands of Waffen-SS soldiers, ex-Waffen-SS soldiers. Hunke was one of them. We don't know if he committed war crimes, but his division, the 14th Waffen-SS division, did commit war crimes. And when Hunke was essentially revealed to be still living in Canada at 98 years old, last September, when this incident occurred, the government of Poland asked for his extradition. Now, nothing has happened
to be brought
that.
up on war crimes. In fact, we predicted that here on the show. Like, when is Poland going to now invite and ask to have this guy extradited so he could be brought up in war crimes in Poland? Has Trudeau gone along with that?
There's been nothing done about that. But it's not surprising, Clayton, because I discovered last week that Justin Trudeau's father, if it's really his father, Pierre Trudeau, when he was Justice Minister a year before he became Prime Minister, he was asked to give his legal opinion about whether or not Subject F, we don't know who the Subject F was, but he was a war criminal living in Canada who had been tried in absentia for war crimes in Latvia, for basically murdering thousands of people as part of a Waffen-SS death squad. Trudeau said, no, we cannot deport this man, even though clearly he's guilty of war crimes. And it doesn't matter that he obviously lied about his past when we let him into Canada. And Trudeau's reasoning was purely political. He said, if we deport this guy, we're probably going to have to deport thousands of other people. But Pierre Trudeau was well aware that Canada had war crimes people. We had war criminals living in Canada. We had thousands of them. They were guilty of atrocious crimes. They participated in the Holocaust. And he did nothing about it, just like his son has been linked to this Nazi.
Not surprising at all. One other thing I wanted to get your take on here, and we'll see if Trudeau apologizes or finally comes forward on this. I mean, it's pretty egregious. But something else I wanted to get your take on was this back and forth with Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons this week, and you have Justin Trudeau on the floor trying to really paint those who support Pierre Poilievre and, of course, the Conservatives as right-wing extremists, MAGA extremists. They're trying to really paint this picture that these people in Canada are somehow Trump supporters. Those people that live in Alberta, that are all moving to Alberta to get away from the Trudeau regime, are somehow Trump MAGA extremists. And we have a lot of Alberta watchers who watch our show, so I wonder how they feel about that. Anyway, Trudeau got up there and said this. Watch.
Mr. Speaker, what we hear from the Leader of the Opposition is under the previous Conservative government, everything was perfect, and what he is proposing to do is to make Canada great again. That is not what Canadians want. He is pining for a nostalgia that, quite frankly, Canadians do not feel. They remember what he did as part of Stephen Harper's failed housing minister. He remembers the people the rights of Indigenous peoples violated, the ignoring of environmental responsibilities, and the lack of an environmental and economic plan for the future. We're going to continue.
David, this has to be my favorite slip of the tongue Freudian slip, that Pierre Poilievre wants to make Canada great again, and Canadians don't want that. Like, I mean, so Canadians really don't want to be made great again?
Trudeau has been hyperactive all week when he's appeared in the House, and when he rarely does appear in the House. And his answer the other day about inviting Hunka was so incredibly over the top. And this response is just classic Justin Trudeau. Not just a slip of the tongue, but obviously a Freudian slip. No, Canadians don't want to make Canada great again. And he said this just like last week. He said the Liberals had made they had lowered taxes for the top 1% of the country. And did he mean to say that or not? But he's not sticking to his own script very well. And this was a massive embarrassment, because he didn't even suggest that Pierre Poilievre somehow wants to make America great again. He admitted Pierre Poilievre is trying to make Canada great again. But Trudeau doesn't even think that's acceptable, because he thinks, no, Canadians don't want to be great again or ever. They want to be not so great under my leadership.
Well, and I think Pierre Poilievre, I think one of the things that they were discussing, of course, in the House of Commons was this idea of puberty blockers. And of course, Poilievre is saying, well, like we now see in Alberta, and the premier there, Danielle Smith, as we covered here on the show with you previously, that Pierre Poilievre saying puberty blockers, we should be protecting our children, and we shouldn't allow this in Canada. But this is a big statement. So Canada-wide, to block puberty blockers and these gender, and protecting the rights of parents to know what their children are doing. It sounds radical, but this is exactly what Trudeau is slamming about Pierre Poilievre.
Yes, it takes some courage to say what Poilievre said. It shouldn't, because it's very commonsensical, and he's saying what everybody wants somebody in politics to say. State the obvious. This is cruelty to children. This has nothing to do with making the lives of children safer. That's what you keep saying. You keep hearing Justin Trudeau and his cabinet ministers saying, oh, we all love our children. We love our children. We want to make it safe for our children. Well, I'm sorry. Puberty blockers and mutilation through sex change operations at 12 is not making any children's life safer. Not mine, not yours, not anybody's.
Hallelujah. Amen on that. Well, we'll see what another week brings from the Trudeau government. We'll see if we get an apology from Trudeau or a resignation. I'm not holding my breath up there in Canada. And neither should you. David Creighton, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you as always, Clayton.